Welcome in. It is college football smothered and covered. Beautiful Wednesday afternoon here in Atlanta, Georgia. Really appreciate you guys checking out the show. We do have a very, very big show today. Connor O'Gare from Saturday on South will join us. We'll also talk a little bit about the Michigan scandal and some news in the SEC. Well, I guess you can call it news. It's kind of implied. A lot of things, a lot of news that comes out of the SEC office has been muttered behind the scenes, off the record. Something came to light yesterday. We will talk about that. But this is College Football Smothered and Covered, a revamped edition from SEC Smothered and Covered, which went away in 2018. So appreciate you guys listening. Please share the show. Please share the show. Make this a part of your college football listening rotation if you haven't done so already. Okay. Michigan head coach Jim Harbaugh hit with a 4-year show cause penalty, which means absolutely nothing. It means absolutely nothing. This was from the COVID investigation. If you recall, every other assistant coach complied with the NCAA's interview request. Jim Harbaugh did not, and that's why this case was done separately. Yes, you look at a 4-year show cause and you're like, damn, that's a lot. Well, last time I checked, Jim Harbaugh is coaching the Los Angeles Chargers, and he's never coming back to college. Ever. So what's the point? Again, and we'll talk about this in a second, it's to give the appearance that the NCAA is being heavy-handed with Michigan. That's it. That's all there is to it. In reality, this means nothing. Nothing at all, other than a cursory punishment to a man who doesn't give a crap about not being able to coach college for the next 4 years. The Connor Stalions scandal seems to be more of a hot topic than maybe I realized when this new part of the investigation broke and the draft was leaked to ESPN. Let's start from the beginning in terms of this iteration of the scandal. All this is Michigan getting out in front of the Connor Stalions Netflix scandal. Because if we watched this show on Netflix and we hear and see that Sherrone Moore had over 50 text messages that he deleted the day the scandal broke, everything would have gone back to late October, and Michigan would be in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. This is Michigan getting out in front of the story. And that's why this draft was leaked. When does the NCAA ever leak a draft? When does a school ever leak a draft? They never do. But the NCAA does not want Michigan, does not want to hammer Michigan. Michigan understands that this is going to be a bad look if this comes out on TV rather than from the school, or at least the school through a media representative itself. So that's all this is. It's not that big of a deal, and I can't wait. With all that said, I can't wait to watch this Netflix documentary. It is going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome to see what happens with all this. But the news of the leaked document and that Connor Stalions was on the sideline against Central Michigan, and Sherrone Moore did delete text, at least according to what investigators found, has led to this question. And this is from Bro Bible. Michigan football could be hit with its postseason ban for cheating scandal if the NCAA gets its way. Now, this is from Bro Bible. I love Bro Bible. This is not anything against that website. The NCAA is not, it's not the NCAA getting its way. It's just, that's not, they don't want to do this. And honestly, I've been asked this question time and time again on radio shows over the last week. Will the NCAA hammer Michigan? The answer is no. And I think for a couple of reasons. One, they already suspended Jim Harbaugh for this for 3 games last year. Could they suspend Sherrone Moore? Yes. But they're not going to have direct evidence that he was involved. They didn't have direct evidence that Jim Harbaugh was involved. And it's not like the NCAA couldn't connect some dots last year to say, well, if Jim knew, then assistants knew. Of course they think that. There was no evidence for Jim. There's no evidence for Sherrone Moore, but it's implied. It's implied. So if Harbaugh got popped last year and Sherrone Moore didn't, what's new? Is anything new? Sure. We found out that over 50 text messages were deleted. Did we know that last year? They were there for a long time. The NCAA was. So I think the only news that came out of this new iteration of the story is that the NCAA did find that Connor Stalions was on the Central Michigan sideline, which I think there needs to be a lot of questions asked to Central Michigan because of that. But it's not going to be a situation where suddenly the NCAA is like, oh my God, we got to get Michigan again. No, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some sort of cursory suspension for Sherrone Moore for the first game. I would even doubt that, but okay, maybe that's in the cards, just mostly for PR purposes. And the NCAA already got Michigan in terms of the school itself. Now, I know the COVID investigation was separate, and they're two different investigation parties doing it. But I'd say with the COVID stuff that led to Harbaugh's 3-game suspension early last season, beginning of the season, they came down on Michigan pretty hard. And they'll never admit it that they intertwined the punishment for each scandal. I think they did. I think that privately they can look at the recruiting restrictions and the fines and everything else from the COVID stuff and say, all right, that's enough. Because the last thing the NCAA wants to do, I know they're trying to stay relevant. The last thing the NCAA wants to do is scar another national championship like it did with USC. It's bad for the sport. It's one thing to hammer Kentucky. I apologize, Kentucky fans. Hammering Michigan, vacating wins, vacating titles, that does more harm than good. And so if you're searching for relevancy, as the NCAA is, sure, you go levy punishment on schools and teams that have minor issues, like Kentucky and jobs at a hospital that, you get paid full time for and you don't go. Everybody does that anyway, by the way. You're not going to stain a national title again, because if you want to stay relevant, great. That makes you too relevant. And there is such a thing as being too relevant in a situation like this. Joined by Connor O'Gara, good friend. He writes for Saturday Down South. He also does the podcast over there. Connor, we are sitting here, 2.5 weeks from the start of college football season. Like, we all hang out in Dallas or wherever SEC Media Days are, but it still seems like it's a fictional sort of thing. Now it seems real.
It does. We have fall camp videos that are coming out. Every player is going to be an All-American. It's still kind of talking season, which is good. But football is very much on the horizon. And that, to me, feels like we have made it through the offseason. For those of us in the content game that talk about this year-round, we understand what it means to get through the offseason. And it's not that it's a bad time of year, but to be at this place now where we actually have real storylines coming out about things that will impact week 0, week 1, it's a great place to be.
It is. It is. A great place to be also is Athens, Georgia. I'm a firm believer that they were the best team in the country. They just lost at the wrong time last year. If they were to three-peat, they would be the biggest dynasty in multiple generations. With that said, they're losing a little bit in the secondary. Stokes is back, obviously, but still lack of depth there. In the front seven, I think you can just sort of chalk up like they just clone the same person at some science building in Athens at this point. But what's the upside, especially now that we know Ra Thomas is gone, and maybe there are some questions at receiver, mostly generated from the lack of Ladd McConkey and Brock Bowers.
I actually feel, even without Ra Thomas, that Georgia has more depth at pass catcher than they had last year. Now, maybe part of that is because we had the injuries to Ladd and to Bowers that were impacting what that depth looked like at times. But I do feel like you can kind of go up and down and go, man, I really like Colby Young coming over from Miami. I think he's going to be a good red zone target. London Humphreys is a guy who was popping at Vandy as a true freshman.
Which is hard to do.
It's darn near impossible to do. It really is. I love what he's going to potentially be able to do. I think Dom Lovett is going to be one of the best receivers in the SEC and maybe one of the better receivers in all of college football if he's able to kind of step into his more familiar role as the primary slot guy with Bowers and McConkey not necessarily working in at that spot. I like the upside of the offense. I love Trevor Etienne getting involved in the passing game as well for coming over from Florida. I do think that there are questions to be asked about their schedule, what it's going to look like week in, week out. Does Carson Beck have the proverbial clutch gene that Stetson Bennett obviously had in spades? Is he going to be that guy in those big time moments? Those are fair things to ask, but Georgia has the fewest questions of any team in college football. And if you're picking Georgia to win a national championship, to win their third in 4 years, you're pointing directly to that fact and saying, you know what, I'm just going to trust them to figure out all those other things that we could probably nitpick and find as a potential weakness.
And running backs, I don't know if you saw the picture of Robinson. He looks like he's a superhero,
dude.
The Hulk. I mean,
how do they do this? What is the water in Georgia? You can attest to this. You live in Georgia. What is the water? How do I obtain this? And why does it all go directly to Athens?
I don't know, man. I work out a ton and I don't look like that. And I figure, like, from an athletic perspective, I think a lot of us, I'm comparable to some of those running backs as a pure athlete, right?
I saw a picture of Jason Hayward when he was a baby, and it confirmed my belief more than ever that the water is just different in Georgia.
It is.
It just is. And there's no way around it. I don't have any sort of proof. If we can figure out that there are places that have like contaminated water and it's impacting people with, with cancer and obviously very serious stuff. Go watch Aaron Brockovich. We can prove that there's water that is impacting people in the state of Georgia.
That's a solid pull. You're right. You're right. And speaking of Georgia, in the state of Georgia, there will be a game played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium week 1. The Bulldogs, of course, will be in it. Clemson will be too. And I'm fascinated by this game. And you look at the line, it's a double-digit line. I don't think there's a lot of faith in Clemson after, what Dabo has or hasn't done, I guess, over the last, year plus, even though they had 9 wins last year, and that's a down year at Clemson. I think this game's going to be closer than people realize or expect because I think Georgia's going to play it close to the vest. And I actually think Clemson's better than the semi sort of above average team we saw. I think they're going to open the game up with Cade Klubnik. I think they're fine with Maffa at running back. I think they have potential at wide receiver. Are you counting on that game to be close, or is Georgia going to make a statement? Is Kirby going to go out there and try to prove that this team is still a 900-pound gorilla?
It's still a 900-pound gorilla. It's still a team that I think is going to show up with some bad intentions and win by 4 touchdowns. I do. And look, you talk about the potential strengths of Clemson. We know what the weaknesses are, and it's a problem when you don't have a coach that is able to address the weaknesses in the transfer portal, which is really how it should be used in this day and age, is to address weaknesses. And even Georgia has been more willing to do that than they initially were. They have issues at receiver. They still are trying to find that guy. I mean, when was the last guy at Clemson? freshman Justin Ross? Is that what we're
Yeah.
talking about here? And that's the issue. Even if you believe that Cade Klubnik is going to improve with his decision making, even if you think that they're going to have a little bit more diversity on the offensive side of the ball after Garrett Riley came over last year, you're still wondering who are the guys that are going to make a difference? Who are the guys that are going to be able to take advantage of the inexperience that Georgia has at corner? And I question what that's going to look like. And Brent Venables ain't walking through that door for that Clemson defense. So I'm not really banking on them to be able to make stops consistently, not in that building. Yeah, I think Georgia is able to kind of run away with that one and make a very loud, maybe not quite 2022 Oregon levels of a statement, but it'll be a
That
loud
was a
statement
statement.
nonetheless.
There's no
Yeah, it
doubt.
was.
That was embarrassing for Oregon. Let's talk about another big game in week 1, and that is A&M and Notre Dame. I'm fascinated by this one too, because I think Notre Dame can be a playoff team. As long as Riley is healthy at quarterback. They have an identity of winning in the trenches. You know what you're going to get from Notre Dame. It's not like they're trying to reinvent the wheel. Texas A&M kind of is a little bit, not only with Elko, but come out of the dark ages with the offense. They have a great receiving core, and they've got a guy in Connor Wegman who I like when he's healthy, and NFL scouts that I've talked to absolutely love. And this game is floating around a 1-point pick 'em either side, depending on which way the wind is blowing. If Texas A&M wins this game, let's play a hypothetical. If Texas A&M wins this game, what does that mean for you?
I don't want it to mean too much because how did Billy Napier start off at Florida? Statement win against Utah, a Utah team
Yeah,
that I had picked to go to the 4-team college football playoff.
I
A
did too,
game
actually.
It was easy. It was easy to buy
Yeah,
into that Utah buzz that year. I mean, I'll still buy into Cam Rising as long as you tell me he's got his knees intact. All right.
yeah.
Whenever that guy takes the field, I'm on board. But you look at this matchup and you could see all of those things just leading to all sorts of hype for A&M because their 4 biggest games of the season are all at home. And if you can win that one, well, hey, anything is kind of on the table for you. It doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be the case. I think the Aggies still have questions of being able to just go on the road and win a football game, which is something that they really struggled to do during the Jimbo Fisher era. But as it relates to this specific game and handling Notre Dame, I think it's going to be a question of, does A&M have those guys on the offensive line? Because if you don't, against a year 3 Marcus Freeman defense, that's going to be a problem. I love Connor Wigman as well. I think that he is going to get first round discussion at season's end.
Yep.
And while I'm not necessarily making the case for him to be QB1 in this draft, a la my guy Trevor Sycamore over at PFF, but I do believe that there is so much to like with how he faces pressure. And that's going to be pivotal in a game like this, where maybe they're still figuring things out on that offensive line. It seems like they've been figuring out things on the offensive line, or at least trying to, for the last 3+ years with no real success. But I think it's going to be very similar to the 2018 Clemson game that A&M hosted, and they played down to the wire against a Clemson team that went on to win a national championship. And it made us say, whoa, the Aggies are kind of for real. They're not really a pushover. They're probably going to be able to play with any team on that schedule. I don't think they quite get it done, but I guess, moral victory in a loss. I don't think Aggie fans really want one of those, but I do think it's on the table for them in that big game with College Game Day in the house.
I heard you say that Connor Wegman could be QB1. How dare you slight Shedeur Sanders, who is the best quarterback of this or any generation?
Look, a lot to like. A lot to like.
Oh, man.
Would love to see it with a good offensive line, but I'm not there yet. I'm not there
I
yet
don't
with
know.
him. Give me Connor Wigman over Shedeur Sanders.
I would say there are quite a few people I take over Shedeur Sanders. I'm also fascinated week 1 with Florida. Obviously, everyone's like, oh, Billy's going to get fired. Billy's going to get fired. Look at that schedule. It's a gauntlet, blah, 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 blah. And I'm of the belief, hey, it's not necessarily the wins and losses. It's what they look like. But more importantly, if the structure of a winning program is there, because it wasn't the last couple of years. I don't think Billy recognized what coaching big boy SEC football was like in terms of just not necessarily letting his coaches coach, but just organizing a business, right? Like, I think that part of it is where he really struggled, and it kind of bled over into the football side. But what does Florida expect over the next couple of years, because the schedule's not going to be any better. I feel like there's sort of been a reset within that entire program and that entire school, because Ben Sass obviously resigned. So it almost feels like there's been taking a step back. Like, all right, you don't have to win a national championship. You don't really have to contend for the SEC, but just be entertaining, just be relevant most of the time. And beyond this gauntlet, you can move forward. Is that fair? Or do you think that actually there are folks out to get Billy Napier no matter what happens?
I think there will be folks who are still frustrated, and you can get into the chancellors and all the other people that have a say in a decision like this, because I don't really want to hear about Scott Strickland and his unbiased opinion about this. He's very biased about this. He needs Billy Napier to be able to work out as a college football coach and not go 5-7 again. I think we can all agree on that, despite the fact that Florida is an everything school. It prides itself on being in every school. You can't watch the Olympics and not see the impact that Florida has on all of these different sports. Yeah. And that's great, but it's still football, and football still moves the needle, and it's still going to be about how they look in these games, knowing that they're going to have so many people firing off those takes if they lose. That's
especially week one,
especially in a game like that, a pressure cooker game for both of these head coaches. It doesn't necessarily mean if you win it, you're safe. If you lose it, you're done, even though that's the black and white way that we like to look at these things. I do think that it's so weird hearing Billy talk now about that reset that you mentioned. Barrett, I don't know about you, but when Billy said at SEC Media Days, we overhauled our nutrition program, I went, what?
Yeah.
You were supposed to be the guy that stepped in and had all that stuff figured out already. And that's what we were praising you for. You were the man with the plan, with the big support staff and this massive staff in this picture that you took. And now you're having guys going into year 3 saying, oh, yeah, we actually have to document now that we eat breakfast and lunch. And we have people
so
checking
weird,
in. I'm like, what?
That goes back to the same thing. Like, from a business perspective, organize that
and figure that stuff out before you get on campus, not after you see the way that it plays out when you're 11-14 through the first 2 years. So I have questions. I think they win that first game, and I think he still ends up getting fired because the back half of the schedule is just so unbelievably tough, or at least we think it's going to be. I think it's just going to be a roller coaster year for Billy Napier.
Yeah, I think the first half, though, is interesting because if they beat Miami, they still have Tennessee, A&M, they have UCF. Like, it's pretty tough in the first half too. But I think if they come out hot, then that can drastically change what the opinion of him will be. It is a fascinating situation because I think if Florida hits the reset button again, I don't know where they go, and I don't know what they want the program to be if you're not going to be patient with anybody. Now, obviously, Dan Mullen's a little different, but it is what it is. I said on this show, and I know you've been up there, that if you're looking for a dark as night dark horse to become a star and potentially vault into the first round of the NFL draft and become one of the best quarterbacks in the country, I say Brock Vandagriff at Kentucky with the weapons he has around him. I know, like, sometimes when you say a random quarterback that nobody's heard of is going to be good, people say, oh my God, it's a hot take. Am I wrong thinking that of all the guys that nobody really pays attention to or has any experience, that Brock could be one of those guys that comes out of nowhere?
Yeah, but I wouldn't take it for 2025. I would take it for the year after, because I would say I'd like to see 2 years of him as a starter and not just necessarily. I always have questions about the guys who spend 1 year as a starter. I think the NFL is kind of catching on to that, the lack of reps and like how much that could be a potential red flag for some of these guys. But in terms of the potential, what have we seen from Brock Vandagriff so far to make us think he's not that guy? To make us think that, yeah, he was overrated as a recruit. He just doesn't have it. Because if you spend time with him, if you watch what he's good at, if you listen to other people talk about him, you would think the playbook's going to be wide open. Yeah. Now, his mastery of that playbook could take some time. And that's another reason why I kind of think this could be more of a 2-year thing, because the Bush-Hamdan offense was implemented super late in spring with my doppelganger, Liam Cohen, having the very late decision to go back to the NFL. And so they delayed the start of their spring camp for him to be able to implement this offense. But Man, I think he's Southern Will Levis. I really do. I think
I
he
love it.
does things really similarly
He's
to
not
the
as
Kentucky
weird as
quarterback.
Will Levis, is he?
He's not big. He's just a good Southern boy. Just a good Southern
Yeah.
boy. He likes to be able to do his duck hunting. He likes to be able to, take a drive and on a Sunday after church and see his family. He's got his sister right down the road playing volleyball at Eastern Kentucky. He's got a very strong support staff within, and his family is going to be a big part of kind of his next few steps, I think. And you're going to hear a lot about them if he's that guy. Now, I don't know that the surroundings are going to yield him being that breakout bona fide star year one, but does he show you enough in that first season as a starter to make you think, you know what? This guy he's flashing some real upside, and there needs to be more people talking about him. I think that is very much on the table for him in this first year as a starter.
His dad, Greg, was my assistant baseball coach when I was in high school.
Was he
Fun
really? How
fact.
about
Yeah.
that?
He used to have us
Dang.
over for WWE back before, but actually no, WWF, before they had to change the name, and it was like the WCW was part of it, and he would have all these parties for his high school kids and body slam us off the couch, which probably would get you thrown in jail
Yeah,
nowadays.
not to get into the Hoover stuff, but it's a
It
little
was
bit
all in good fun.
problematic right now. Yeah.
It was all in good fun. It was all in good fun. Last thing, we don't talk about Mississippi State a lot on this show because we cover the entire world of college football, and honestly, Mississippi State's kind of an afterthought. But Levy comes in, and I've talked to a lot of folks, and the most important thing he's done is organize the NIL efforts. That's what he was really good at Oklahoma, and that was one thing, the biggest thing that Mississippi State lacked last season, and really for the couple years leading up to it as well. What's the upside of Mississippi State just overall in this new look SEC long term, not necessarily this season?
I don't know that it's quite what Zach Arnett was predicting, saying that it's a 12-team playoff contender on a yearly
Yeah.
basis. I'm not there. That's the tough thing when people say, "Oh, Mississippi State and Kentucky, they're getting disrespected in the preseason." It's like, well,
What is respect?
Yeah, what is respect? That's a good question. Like, how do you quantify that? Because Mississippi State has had one winning season in SEC play in the 21st century, and it was when the best player in the history of their program, Dak Prescott, was at his absolute best in
Yeah.
2014. So take that with a grain of salt. But I do think that they have a long-term vision to kind of get back to what they were with Dan Mullen. I think that's at least on the table. We need to see a million other things with Jeff Lebby as a head coach before we can get a more definitive answer with that. But I think the goal for him in year one, and it's really more like a year zero if you consider they lost like half of their scholarship players over the course of
Yeah.
the last two seasons in the portal with what they're trying to replace. But I do think that the goal is just be fun. Be fun, establish
Yep.
that identity. So many teams want to do like these great grand things, and Mississippi State, maybe that time will come when they can make those expectations, but just be fun in year one and be able to recruit to the portal. They did some nice things recruiting to the receiver position. Even Blake Shapen is going to be, I think, their best deep ball passer since Dak, which is really
Mm-hmm.
not saying that much considering the deep ball passers they've had since him. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see if they can get over the hump in SEC play. I don't have them winning an SEC game. I don't. I just think they're
I
going
don't
to be
think I do either.
overmatched. It's really tough to kind of forecast them actually breaking through and having enough guys on the defensive side of the ball. That's where I really think they're going to miss kind of the remnants of the Zach Arnett era. But yeah, man, I think it's just about being fun in year one and trying to establish those NIL efforts and trying to just build up some sort of an identity, because Jeff Lebby saw an identity form during his time at Ole Miss. He saw an identity beginning to form at Oklahoma with Brent Venables.
Yeah.
Can he take that to Mississippi State? It's a big question.
It'll be fascinating to see the program, like where it goes. Cause I agree with you. If you're Mississippi State, be where Dan Mullen was. And that is consistently in a bowl game. Doesn't have to be a big one, but consistently in a bowl game every single season. Keep your fans happy and give them something to pay attention to before baseball season.
What about basketball? Are we discounting basketball, Mississippi State? Okay.
Kind of. Connor, let everybody know where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. Saturday Down South podcast, wherever you get your podcast, where you can hear people like Barrett on my show as well. And, we've got a lot of great things that we're going to be doing during the season. Really excited, twice a week, and tons of great content. SaturdayDownSouth.com. it's top 25 week going down right now. We just, it's ranking season, so we do a bunch of stuff with that. And have Crystal Ball series coming out. That's what I'm working on right now. So yeah, I always tell people it's the best one-stop shop for any college sports fan. And we're in season, man. We're officially in season now that the calendar is, second week in August or whatever this is.
Yep. No, I even booked my trip to Ireland today.
We're talking Ireland off air. We're doing that.
Yes. Kind of appreciate it.
Thanks, man.
All right. Last thing before we head out. And this is from my former employer and a place that I absolutely respect, and some good friends over there still. Before we decided to move on, this is from Alex Scarborough and John Talty. John Talty, of course, formerly covering Alabama, now one of the lead guys over at 24/7. 24/7 is obviously affiliated with CBS, and then Alex Scarborough, ESPN, now covers Alabama on 24/7. Two great guys. Love these two dudes. The SEC moving forward toward adopting mandatory injury reports in time for the 2024 college football season. We all knew this was coming. The Big Ten did it last year. Not surprised that the SEC did it this year. There was discussion in Destin at SEC spring meetings. I'm sure there was some discussion via Zoom since then. I'm sure this was decided long ago. It was just put out there through the media yesterday. And I know one of the reactions was, well, coaches are going to lie. Well, yeah, probably. They're going to embellish. They're going to lie. They're going to live in the gray area, whatever. And the reaction I saw was more toward the coaching side of this, when in reality, the only reason conferences are doing this is money. Money from Caesars, money from FanDuel, money from DraftKings, money from BetOnline, money from all of these dudes, all of these outlets, all of these sports books. Now that it's out there and legal in a lot of states, proper information needs to be allowed for sports books to properly set lines. And those lines dictate their bottom line. And so with legalized gambling out there, the popularity of any sport goes through the roof. Illegal gambling was a big part of it anyway. It's a big reason why football as a sport is as popular as it is today. It's the truth. So with proper information, you have proper business decisions being made by odds makers, which means everybody wins. And that sort of correlates to something that was discussed way back when about games being fixed and things like that. This also prevents more games from being fixed because the sports books are the gatekeepers. It's why Brian Bohannon was fired at Alabama at baseball. It's really hard to fix games if everybody has all of the information. And the real police in all of this, which are the sports books, understand their role is massive in terms of how the game is played and what money gets generated to which outlets. It's all about gambling, which is fine. That'll wrap it up for this edition of College Football Smothered and Covered. Really appreciate you checking out the show. Please share the show, write a review, leave a comment, all of that stuff. Big things popping for this show. Big things. Not just for how it's distributed, but also content that will be coming your way, particularly content from across the pond. Maybe in a couple weeks when Florida State, I should say, and Georgia Tech tee it up in Dublin, Ireland. Might be some fun content related to that matchup across the pond. We'll talk about that a little bit later. It'll be fun, though. I promise you. Might be some golf played. Until next time, have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you soon.